Thanks for watching. So yeah, over the years, I've been putting out a lot of information on the Black Hebrew Israelites, the Bible history and what have you. Recently, I put out a lot of good information as far as, understanding where we get our understanding of the Bible from, as far as the biblical manuscripts. So a lot of people recently have been, getting into the whole Black Hebrew Israelite doctrine. I feel like enough information is out there on that, but it's so much. A lot of people don't know where to look. And it's just this really difficult understanding on the doctrine, because when you're first taught it, it's very easy to believe because of how it's explained, and it kind of makes sense and it fits. So you guys need to understand, one of the issues is just critical thinking. And two is just not knowing history of the Bible, right? So you got to understand, right? Go get into this thing. So talked about this a lot, but I want to just really go through some things that people seem to miss. So first you got to go to the history, proven history, right? With ancient Kemet and everything that was happening around that time. And you have to look at the conquest of Egypt, right? Because the conquest of Egypt is going to give you more insight into the Hebrews, right? Into the Israelites. So now you have people, they're trying to separate it now. So now you have people saying that the Israelites, the Hebrews, and the Jews are different, that the Jews and the Hebrews are different, and the Hebrews are the Israelites. So the doctrine, as I said, over time has been switching up, and people have been switching up their understanding or message as far as, the history of this doctrine, which is just crazy. But understand, the Persians and the conquest of Kemet is going to give you more insight into that. The thing is, we have documentation. We have proven history as far as the conquest in the history of ancient Egypt, right? Proven, right? Documented. Now, you have to make that fit with biblical history to explain a few things. One of those things is, how is it that they're giving what we call Israel to the Israelites, right? Basically saying that they occupied it for this time and it was basically in control. Now, the time frame where they would be in control would be around the time frame that the ancient Egyptians would be in power. So it's crazy that, the Bible was basically saying that they occupied Egyptian territory, right? That it just don't make sense. So history does not say that at all. But to get around that, you have to just look at conquest. So you have the Persians, as we know. The Persians was the first to go in there and completely conquer Kemet, right? They experienced civil war, what have you, but they would get it all under control at some point. So you have the Persians come in there and conquer Kemet. And you would have to believe that during this time where you have this large Persian empire, right? And there's supposedly over 1 million Israelites, that somehow the Persian army, the Persian military, passed through Israel, made their way all the way over to Egypt, and just somehow skipped the Israelites, right? Now, the Bible makes up for that by basically saying that the Persians did run into the Israelites or the Hebrews, and they were lenient in understanding of these people's culture and custom. Understand, whenever you're studying this as far as the Israelites and just the history on it, everybody's always tolerant of the Israelites. Now, we're going to stick with the Black Hebrews at this point, because you have to look at it and say, and even the Black Hebrews agree, that Kemet was Black, right? So if Kemet was Black and you had the Persians on their way to conquer Black people, and on their way they run into the Israelites, right? The Hebrews, who are also Black, right? Wouldn't you think that would be a problem? That would be an issue, right? Because we don't know what the alliances are or what's going on. So biblical history would say, well, yeah, of course they wouldn't like the Hebrews, so they would be okay, the enemy of my enemy is my friend type deal. The problem is the Persians were conquering, and that land was part of the Egyptian empire, meaning they would conquer it, which, even in biblical history, they did. They conquered it, and they basically said, hey, this is our land now, but we're going to let you do your thing. Doesn't make sense, right? Okay. So we got to believe that the Persians went around Israel, conquered the Egyptians, right? But there is no history, documented proof that the Hebrews or Israelites ever ran into the Persians, ever, right? Still proven history. And of course, you're going to have Hebrew Israelites and, Bible historians or what have you say, well, what are you talking about? We have the Cyrus cylinder, right? We have the whole edict of Cyrus, right? So this is where they make this connection. So when you go and study this whole thing, they're making this connection to say that when the, Persian Empire was basically decreeing that exiled people can basically go back to their land, they were specifically talking about the Hebrews. Whenever you go and look this up, and I've had so many Hebrews talk about this, right? So when they look this up, they Google it most of the time and they read in 539 BCE, which that would be the 6th century BCE, Cyrus the Great, the Persian king, issued the Edict of Cyrus, allowing the exiled Israelites to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. This decree marked the end of the Babylonian exile and a turning point in Jewish history, right? And they even give you elaborations, right? It says, Cyrus the Great, end of decree. Cyrus conquered Babylonia and, in a move that has been interpreted as a fulfillment of Jeremiah's prophecy, allowed the exiled Israelites who had been in Babylonian captivity since 587 BCE to return to their homeland of Judea. Fulfillment of prophecy. The decree was seen as a fulfillment of the prophetic writings, particularly those of Jeremiah, who foretold the return of the exiled Israelites, right? Rebuilding the temple. The primary purpose of the return was to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, which had been destroyed by the Babylonians, right? So understand, this is the document that they look to as being the proof that, this happened. Now look at what I just read. I just read it to you. So they would go and Google that and they would read that and not understand what they're reading. They're not realizing one. And I talked about this before. It's why I've been using Google to show you guys how this shit works and what most people do. They go right to Google. So the thing is, one, Google's going to give you context, right? Elaborations, which they just did. None of that is basically saying this was proven true and it actually happened. You can't believe everything is true unless it's telling you it's true, or you do further research and it has been proven true, right? This has not been proven true. Now, if you go and do more research on this whole subject, you'll find out one, wow, you have scholars, biblical scholars, giving you their interpretation of what they believe the Edict of Cyrus is basically saying, or who it's pertaining to. It doesn't actually say what people are, believing it to mean. It's not specifically talking about, Hebrews or Israelites. In fact, there is no mention. The Persians never mention any Hebrews or Jews ever. There's no documentation of them speaking of these people, which should be crazy if you are traveling as far as they travel through Israel, past Israel, what have you. You're going to encounter this large, over 1 million Jews, supposedly. Now, you can get caught up in date and time or what have you. We're talking about the 6th century BCE where these people should have existed. But there's no documentation of these people doing anything, right? Except for the Bible, right? So if you use Google, you can just keep on reading and you'll figure out what it's actually talking about unless you see what you want to see and you run with that, which is what people are doing. But it says, while the Hebrew Bible details interactions between Jews and the Persian Empire in the 5th century BCE, which would basically be, almost 100 years after conquest. There are no known surviving Persian records or inscriptions that directly mention the Hebrews during that period. While the Persian Empire did conquer Babylon and allow the exiled Israelites to return to Judah, historical evidence outside of the Bible is scarce, right? So again, they're giving reference as to what all this is about because they want to say, of course, the Cyrus cylinder is talking specifically about the Hebrews, the Jews, and it's not. So it says here, no, the Cyrus cylinder, which is considered the primary evidence of the Edict of Cyrus does not explicitly mention the Hebrews, Jews, or Jerusalem. The cylinder primarily focuses on the restoration of Babylonian temples and the repatriation of exiled peoples in general. While some scholars interpret it as a broader policy of religious tolerance that could include the Jews, the text itself does not explicitly reference them, right? So everything I read to you when I first started reading, all the stuff is giving you and it's telling you and it's talking about the biblical history of what this stuff supposedly means. This is what they do. They attach themselves into proven history. And then when you read the stuff, if you don't do actual research, you're not going to see this. So if you read books like this here or any type of books that's really giving you insight into this, and this is Judaism from Cyrus to Hadrian, which is perfect for what we're going to talk about here. If you see my previous videos, you understand what I'm going to get into when I say that part. So when you read books that's actually getting into this real history, then you see what's going on. And in this book, they'll mention to you clearly, there is no mention of any Jews, any Hebrews or Israelites, right? None of these ancient sources that we see mention these people. So you have Herodotus, who wrote about the civil war that happened between the Egyptians and the Persians when they were rebelling against what they were instilling in Kemet. Because, Cyrus was supposedly lenient, but then Xerxes came along after Cyrus, and Xerxes was a tyrant. Xerxes didn't give a shit, and he changed everything. So it's hard to believe that, Xerxes would basically, allow these people to exist and just continue to do their thing. I talked about this same thing with the Greeks, that the Greeks would do all the conquests they did, everything that they did, and just allow these Jews. Everybody's giving these Jews a pass, right? But there's no real documentation that they ever came in contact with these people at all during the time that they should be existing when everything is going on. Because you had all this conquest happening, right? All this conquest is going down. These people are nowhere to be found, except in the Bible, right? Where are these people in history? We can't find them. So to bring it to the point, if a lot of people believe in, of course, if the Hebrews did exist, they were black. There's no way around that. Me and the black Hebrews, we agree on that. Of course they were. But you have to understand that this was indoctrination, that these people were forced into this understanding, and it's not something that was natural. So now you have what the black Hebrews want to tell you is poof. All of a sudden, we get this inception of these black Hebrews, and they were just going about their business, and everything biblical happened, right? There's no proof of that, right? So it's people who want you to believe that this is the case, and somehow with the years and years of Persian conquest, hundreds of years of Greek conquest, Roman conquest, that they gave all that shit up to follow or steal the doctrine of these true black Jews, only to later give it back to them in truth, right? It don't make sense. So you got to understand, this is the thing that had me scratching my head, where you have these black Hebrews, these so-called scholars saying, hey, the white man came and changed this, or they changed the doctrine. It's the only doctrine you know. Then what are you following, right? You're not following the Masoretic text. You're not following, none of the unseals or none of the Greek writings. What are you following? Everything you know as far as biblical history comes from the King James Version, right? Comes from the Bible that we all know. So if you're saying that this was changed, then why are you believing it? Why are you believing any of it? Everything you know as far as the biblical story, the story of the Hebrew Israelites, comes from your Bible, plain and simple. You are not following the doctrine that the mystic Jews or the Ashkenazis and all these other, the Jews just running things. You're not following that same doctrine. It's completely different. You're looking at Deuteronomy 28. Remember, all this stuff is stemming from Deuteronomy 28, book of Deuteronomy, right? This is King James Version. I have already proven to you guys and shown you guys that Deuteronomy 28 and the oldest biblical manuscripts, which would be Codex Sinaiticus, is the oldest complete, not the oldest. Codex Vaticanus is older, but it's the oldest complete. No, it is not the Ethiopian Bible. It's not the oldest complete Bible. It is the oldest illustrated Bible. It's not older than Codex Sinaiticus. Understand? A lot of people just coming up and saying things and not doing this research. The Ethiopian Bible is not older than Codex Vaticanus and Codex Sinaiticus. It is the oldest illustrated Bible. All right? Understand that. So you want to put this back to black people, which is why they want to believe King James is black. They want to believe the Ethiopian Bible was the first Bible. No, it was actually copied from a Greek manuscript by Abba-Garima, a Byzantine royal, that's Roman. Understand where this stuff is coming from. But you got to realize, you got to look at history. The conquest of Kemet is the key to all of this, right? So again, I don't like arguing with the Black Hebrews because people who are religious, they get too emotional. They don't understand what they're talking about. But you have to use common sense to understand that, yeah, I'm going to agree with you guys, of course. We're talking about the original Hebrews, right? As far as the people existing that was pushing this doctrine first, that would be Black people, right? Understand that. But I'm saying this was because of indoctrination. So now, I talked about this in my last video. So we have, of course, Persians conquering Kemet, right? The Greeks come in, take it from the Persians, and then later on down the line, you have Rome take it from the Greeks, right? So Persians first, Greeks, then Romans.